Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. You're listening to Smooth 98.1, Love Music, Love Life. My name is Valentine, your host of our Smooth Breakfast. Today, Wednesday, 31st March 2021. Welcome to Lagos Talk Special. Now, this segment usually brings together all the top stories that are making the headlines for today. For a conversation by you. But today being Wednesday, we have a special presentation of Lagos Talks 981. And that involves talking about one of the topical issues, one of the most topical issues that have been making the rounds in our newspapers. Today's conversation is around education. Education in Nigeria has been faced with a lot of challenges. Especially around this COVID era. I tell people that this COVID era opened our eyes to so many things, possibilities, as well as challenges that have been swept under the carpet for many years. So join me in having this conversation on the failing Nigerian education system, and to identify and address some of its root causes. I have Modupe Adefeso-Olateju. She is the Managing Director of the Education Partnership Center, CEP Center for short, and a policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. Mo, as she's fondly called, was a member of the technical team assembled by the Honorable Minister of Education in Nigeria, and in that capacity wrote a section of the Federal Ministry of Education's Strategic Plan for Education, 2011 to 2015. So she's one of the best people to speak on this issue. Another really special person that, addresses these issues square on, that I will head on every day, is Kehinde Nwani. She's my guest here as well. This is Kehinde Nwani, is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Meadow Hall Group, an educational group of companies with several subsidiaries across the world, not just Nigeria. She practiced law for about 14 years before deciding to pursue her lifelong passion of setting up an educational institution. Dr. Nwani, as she's regarded, holds an international diploma in the Montessori method of teaching, the postgraduate certificate in education, PGCEI, and a master's degree in education from the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. She also acquired a doctorate in education from the University of Leicester, UK. Dr. Kehinde Nwani and Dr. Mo, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's great to be.
My pleasure. You can watch us live, so you can see their lovely faces and listen to them and send in comments through YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please, this is the best time to subscribe. youtube.com/Smooth981FM Lagos. My name is Valentine. You can send in your questions on WhatsApp. WhatsApp number is 0809-444-0981. They've given me the permission to call them by their first name, so I'll call Mrs. Nwani as Dr. Nwani. I'll regard her as Kehinde, or I'll just say Dr. Nwani. Yeah, it's a comfortable.
Kenny is fine. Kenny is fine.
Kenny is fine. Oh, okay. So I said Kenny and Mo, so you know who I'm talking about. Now let's start this conversation. How did we get here? Who would like to start in terms of how the educational system in Nigeria has degraded to this point? Dr. Mo, I'd like to start with you. How did we get here?
Well, thank you so much. I think it's a great question to start any conversation with. I think the first thing to clarify is what is here. So when you say, how did we get here? We have to clarify exactly what we mean. And I suppose what you're referring to are the outcomes of the learning processes that we see chiefly evidenced by the results of children in key stage examinations such as WAEC, challenges that we see in the sector regarding spheres of teacher capacity, issues that we face in the sector as it pertains to public finance administration and the effective utilization of financial resources allocated to the education sector. I suppose you're also referring to some of the curricular challenges, that we face in Nigeria, with a lot of criticism suggesting that the Nigerian curriculum is not optimized to bring out the best in Nigeria's children. And of course, some challenges that we face significantly when it comes to teaching and learning within the context of the classroom. So if that's the here that you're referring to, then I think that the answer becomes easier. We can trace, challenges in the education sector from as far back as the 1970s, when the nationalization policy meant that a lot of the private schools, mission schools, community schools were taken over by the government. the staff of these schools became government staff. And that was fine. I mean, it was the beginning of the oil boom, and there were financial resources, to take care of these schools, which were becoming nationalized. The challenge is, unfortunately, sequel to that, we did enter into a 19-year phase of uninterrupted military administration, and almost uninterrupted military administration, and also a decline in the amount of, in the quantity of accountability that we could observe in the education sector. And if anyone asks me today what the most significant challenge in the education sector is, I would tell you it's a lack of accountability. And it's also a dearth of transparency on what is happening in the sector. Because what happens is when you shine a light, you automatically get all the factors that are supposed to begin to align so that the system can move better, the system can be more optimized. So we can trace it to as far back as the 1970s. And of course, we can always blame it, on the military. But the truth is that even when we transitioned, into democratic leadership, in the country, we see that education has not received the sort of attention that it needs to receive. I think that we also make some errors, in the education sector when it comes to the leadership of the sector at very high levels. And education, unfortunately, has not always had the best leadership, at the very high levels of public service, has not necessarily had leaders that understand the nuance around the sector and what should be prioritized. There continue to be financial challenges, resourcing education, whether it's from the private sector or the public sector. And I think that the pandemic just really shone our eyes, shone the light rather, on how deep the rot in the sector is across many different states. However, I hope I'll have an opportunity later on to talk about some of the bright lights, that we are seeing in the sector, but I don't want to hog, the time that has been allocated to me. So let me stop there for now.
Thank you so much. You laid a solid base to this conversation. I'd like to throw the question to you, Kenny. I like that name, Kenny. Nice. So now, in terms of, the contributing factors to the here that Dr. Mo just defined, the dearth of transparency, the lack of accountability in the education sector, and I feel I would add the lack of representation, like the right representation in government, because I feel like the education sector in Nigeria has to have solid representation so that when policies are being implemented, it's implemented from an informed position. But what are some of those factors that you feel has brought us to this point that Mo just defined?
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mo, for all you've said. Yeah, I think I'll also trace it back to the very beginning. I feel that the way the formal education started in Nigeria really has been the foundation of the issues we're having right now. I take it back to, even when the British brought education to Nigeria, the truth is, even at that time, education wasn't really what they were interested in. What they were interested in was evangelism. What they wanted to do was to bring Christianity to the colonized, country that colonized, and they decided to use education as the means. So right from the beginning, the priority wasn't the quality of education. And I think that's actually part of the problem at the beginning with the North and the South, because at that time, the North said, the North refused to have them come over, knowing that the education they were bringing was going to bring Christianity, and they wanted to maintain their Islamic faith. So even from the beginning, even before we started having our own problems with the UBE and the UPE and all that, when the foundation of anything, every time I think it's very good to trace our roots back, go back to the foundation. So I think that set up everything. And then even when, we started, especially in the South, and the Southwest, when Awolowo, brought in all the education, trying to organize the free education and all that, there were so many problems. He had very, very, very good motives. He had a very good motive. But at the end of the day, teachers, shortage of teachers and all that, was the bane of the day. Training, So all those things, unfortunately, are still the things plaguing education. Lack of enough, schools are not enough, Teachers are not well trained. There's a lot going on. But having said that, I like to speak for the teachers. I like to speak for the teachers because sometimes I feel this here, that where you're talking about the here, how did we get here? This, talking about the failing educational system and all that, very easily it's laid at the feet of teachers. It's the teachers, the quality of the teachers. But we have to look at the other side. She's mentioned quite a number of things. Have we looked at the resources? Or the lack of resources? Have we looked at the infrastructure? You would see schools and you wonder how human beings are expected to go there to teach. How can you be motivated to give your best? We talk about the welfare of teachers. Every time I talk about teachers, I talk to the fact that in Nigeria, we all focus, all of us in education, love the children. It's all about the children. But I liken it to a home where a parent says, I love the children, but ill treats and mistreats the nannies and the people working in the house who are supposed to look after the children. If you truly love your children, you will love the people, your support system. You would love them and make sure. So that's what happened. We all love the children. The country say they love the children. But at the end of the day, we are not given the teachers who have the direct contact with the children.
Yes.
What motivate them to do? We talk about things like performativity. Performativity, Ms. Mo talked about lack of accountability with the leaders. But when it comes to the teachers, they are, I would say, over accountability happens with the teachers. They do not have any autonomy. Everything is guided. They must do this, they must do that. They are professionals. They're not allowed to use their professionality. I didn't start as an educationist. I started my career as a lawyer. I practiced for 14 years before I came into education. Now I've done more education than law. But as a lawyer, I had autonomy. I could take responsibility for things. I was listened to. You have a situation where parents don't even, in fact, in the world, teachers are not even believed to be professionals. Some people say they're semi-professionals. So there's a lot going on both sides. Yes, it's true also that teachers need to, self-develop. They need to, go do their own training and things like that. But there's a lot that's happened and, that culminates in this where the hair that you're talking about now. Yeah, and then of course, putting the right peg in the right hole is very, very important.
Of course.
If you want things to happen in any system, people who are studied, who understand it, who understand everything regarding that sector, and we shouldn't politicize everything. So.
I smell a can of worms being opened today on the show. Our conversation has to be three-pronged because I see this. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I want us to explore the influence of these three sectors together. There's education, there's health, there's security. And if you follow the trend of what's happening now, you see that they are strongly interwoven, more interwoven than there's ever been. And it's so mind-boggling how, the neglect of one keeps a major burden on the other. Well, let's keep that in mind. Stay with us on Smooth 98.1. My special guest for this Lagos Talks 981 conversation is Modupe Mo Adefeso-Olateju. She's the Managing Director of the Education Partnership Center, TEP, and a policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. And Kehinde Nwani is an MD CEO of Meadow Hall Group, an educational group of companies with several subsidiaries, practiced law for 14 years. Now she's back to her first-time passion, education, and we're hoping to see how we can solve some of the problems we have in Nigeria if we're given the free will. Stay with us on Smooth and send in your comments on WhatsApp 0809 444 0981.
This is Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life.
Man, when you were talking, I was just thinking about my alma mater, secondary school. I schooled in a public school, secondary school in my hometown, Agbo, Delta State. And that school right now, in terms of physical structure, has nothing to write home about. There's nothing to write home about now. Like, the structure is so dilapidated. My sets try to contribute to build a classroom or two, but other, sets do the same. But I mean, does it have to depend on these individuals? You find the government neglecting all these institutions. It's almost like education is almost a thing of the past. So at some point it feels uncomfortably intentional. It feels as though, these people are looking to, for lack of a better term, impoverish the education system so that what their ulterior motives can be actualized, especially when it comes to politics. And we're going to go there. It's very sensitive, but we'll go there when it comes to the north.
I sometimes I wish that was the case, because if that was the case, then you would be able to ascribe that to some sort of higher cognitive ability on the part of our learners. But which is
exactly. You feel like they're smart, because for you to be able to do those kind of things, you have to have a level of intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Of the Grapevine. We're back every Tuesday and Thursday from 8:15 a.m. The perfect time.
We are your music station.
Yes.
Good to have you there. It's 21 minutes past 9 o'clock this morning on Wednesday, the last day of March 2021. Exciting moments for those who are expecting salaries today. But we're talking about education, which is the bedrock of any individual's progress in life, bedrock of success, bedrock of anything. I mean, there are different things or different terms or statements people use to describe education in terms of how it forms the core of a person. The character is formed from school. People say charity begins at home, but I feel like it starts from your first teacher, your first learning experience in school. So when we look at the education system in Nigeria, there's little positive, or very, very few positives to speak to that sector today. I remember 2 years ago when we were looking at the budget of Nigeria, the first sections we go to is we look at health, we look at education, and we'll find that the budget for these sectors are still abysmal year in, year out. It seems like not much attention is given to that. There was a story this morning that broke from the Punch newspaper talking about protests as Ogun State dumps 1,500 casual teachers recruitment. They were given the promise to be employed. They were in fact employed in 2019, around December 2019. And then shortly after that, they received SMSs congratulating them for these employments. But they never received the employment letter. The reason was because COVID, COVID hit. Now we're in the throes of COVID. If you just join us, by the way, my special guests are two remarkable people that are playing their parts in pushing the education forward in Nigeria. Modupe Adefeso-Olateju is the Managing Director of the Education Partnership Center, TEP, and a policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. Kehinde Nwani, who's put in 14 years in law, decided to come back to her first passion, which is education, to set up an educational institution. It's called Meadow Hall Group, an educational group of companies with several subsidiaries. They're here today to talk with me, or to discuss with me on this issue, talking about the failing Nigerian education system, identifying and addressing root causes. When Mo spoke the first time, she mentioned lack of accountability and a dearth of transparency as one of the leading factors to bring to where we are now in terms of dealing with education and how bad it is today. We'll look at the positives though. But when Kenny spoke, she took us back to the colonization era and how the systems were handed over to the government. But it seemed like whether the government lacked the political will at the time or the might to move education forward, because sometimes we like to feel like we know better. But do we though? Now COVID has hit. It's like when breeze blow. That's the local part. I'm not going to say the other parts, but we know how it happens, right? The education system in Nigeria has been exposed, not just in Nigeria, in every part of the world. Teachers are now adapting to new methods of teaching. Virtual learning has become the common stay today. Mo, when you see these systems and how we've adapted, or some systems have adapted, it seems like the private sector has adapted faster than the public sector. Before we get to the security matters or the issues, if you're going to score us on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of adaptation, how far have we come? Or adapting to the system, yeah.
So I think as one who's done a bit of quantitative research, it's a question that is not easy to answer because we're not comparing apples with apples. The public sector, unfortunately, is different from the private sector. And some of the levers that are available to the private sector are not available to the public sector simply because of the issues around scale. There's a lot of good practice in the private sector that is challenging to replicate in the public sector, which does not absolve the public sector of their responsibility, but it's just to state that these are the realities and the challenges that are faced by even the most well-meaning of governments, in the public sector today. So rating, I would probably not, ascribe some rating, any kind of rating to either kind of sector. What I will do is to talk about what I know. And that is, that comes in a large part from the studies that we have also conducted during this period, during the COVID period, trying to understand whether there was any sort of learning going on, especially last year when we were really in the throes of the pandemic, and trying to ascertain whether, the demand and the supply factors were working well. And so there seemed to be a lot of provision of different types of educational opportunities and access from the public and the private sector. But were children able to access these resources? And if they were, what were the factors that ensure that they were able to? And what we found was actually really interesting. On the one hand, we saw huge amounts of innovation on the private sector, whether it was on the part of private schools, and Mr. Nwani will probably give you first-hand experience of what she did in Meadowhall. Whether it was private schools, whether it was private technology companies, whether it was innovative finance organizations, whether it was parents, many of whom became teachers last year.
That is so true.
Simply because they had to homeschool their children. Innovative practice, that happened in the sector last year. Interestingly, in some of the public sector spaces as well in certain states, and this isn't just in the south of Nigeria, but even in certain states in the north as well, we saw huge amounts of innovation as well. For example, we saw a lot of radio schooling that was designed and implemented across different states to give children some sort of access, to teaching and learning. Some states went further and they began to teach, on the internet. Teachers would teach on YouTube. Teachers would teach on television. In a state like Lagos last week, the Lagos Learns Together initiative was launched, which is really a combination of the different additional resources that the state had curated to help children to learn even now. Because right now, a lot of children are not in school, full-time. A lot of children are still going to school part-time. So there is actually a lot of innovation going on. But the issue is, how quickly are we going to be able to scale? Because it's easy to look at the statistics and say, 50% of this particular state, is doing well, or there's 50% improvement in this state. But each of those numbers usually represents a child, a human being, who is extremely precious. So as we think about scale, we're thinking about how do we reach that next child, who, by the way, has a fundamental human right, which is access to education, basic education. We're not doing any children favors by providing them with access to quality education. We're performing our right as a government and as a society to ensure that they have access, to education. We're helping them to access their rights. So I think that there are a number of perspectives, but I would say that there are obviously more levers in the private sector to enable innovation, rapid innovation, which is not without its own challenges. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of governments were also in that place where they realized that if children are going to learn anything at all, then we are going to have to do something different. So I think that gives us a bit of a ray of hope.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Mo. Now, Dr. Nwani, when we're looking at that, because you're very versed when it comes to, private education on the private sector, what would you say is, not to compare, like Dr. Mo said, but not to compare, but what would you say is the edge that the private sector, I think it's a two-part question. What's the edge that the private sector have over public? Seems like a rhetorical question because there are a lot. But how do we bridge that gap if that was a possibility?
All right. First of all, let me start by talking about the fact that, honestly, the pandemic has just been, it's just been an amazing thing that happened. It just hit like like an earthquake. And I must say this, that it's very interesting because education is a sector that is almost averse to change. We don't change in education. Everything, we're so steeped in tradition in education. Not in education till tomorrow, people still sit the same way in class. We use the same learning theories. We do the same thing. So for the pandemic to have come and done what it's done, we should be thanking the pandemic. The pandemic caused us to move by force. And, that's just been the beautiful thing. Yes, there's been a lot of innovation. And as Mo said as well, both in the private and the public, the truth is all over the world. They say under every cloud, there's a silver lining. I think one good thing with the pandemic is actually showed the world over. It kind of, made the inequality so visible. So all the governments, because we're talking about the US, talking about the UK and all that, it's everywhere.
Yes.
It's all over the world. Everybody could see for once they could actually see that even in the developed world, there are issues. So that in itself, the fact that we're actually now focusing not just on having the SDG goals and SDGs and writing those things, is actually something that everybody has to do something about. I think bringing that to the surface is a brilliant thing. Now, what do we do? How do we break the gap? I feel that now that it's come to the fore, governments cannot turn away. Like as she said, even the public sector, they all had to rise to the challenge. Lagos State has been fantastic, and I really must commend our governor, Governor Sanwo-Olu, and our commissioner, Honorable Commissioner, Mrs. Adefeso. They've done wonderfully well, because right now, all the TV, they were teaching on TV, on radio. I think even somebody started a WhatsApp school. So people have been so innovative. It's brought out the creativity in us, which actually is one of the 21st century skills that everybody needs. So creativity has come to the fore. Critical thinking has come to the fore. All those things have happened. So yes, we're very, in the private sector, because of I'll say parents they were the most hit because they had to teach, they had to work, they had to teach as well and all that. But then we had the support of the parents. They understood, and also they could help the children buying data, for the children to be able to access the internet and all that. So parents have been able to help with that. The innovative ideas, the resources with the private sector, we've been able to, but which sometimes the public might not have. But even at that, most of the states have risen up to that challenge. What I would also like to say with this, I've been preaching this everywhere. With the pandemic, it has a lot to do with technology, but it is not only technology in the 21st century. So the teachers can also, do other things to help the children. Once we can get everybody back in school, you might not all have the laptops and the internet you need and everything, but we can develop the children in the 4 C's of the 21st century: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication. These are skills that they would need. And really, you don't need it. The technology can enhance it. But even without that, if the teachers are trained, if they understand those skills themselves, they can help the children. These will help the children function in the 21st century workplace. So technology is very key, but also maybe there are other things they can also use to help the children who are less privileged right now, or less, at a disadvantage right now. So they do not just miss out on everything while we get the government to do what it should do to help provide the resources, technological resources that the children need.
So when I went for my child's 9-year birthday 2 weeks ago, right, I met some parents, right? They were around, and I was asking, because I like to ask such questions just to get into some people's minds. And I asked them, how did you cope during the pandemic, as the pandemic hits? How did you cope with adapting to virtual learning? One of them said, this pandemic, it exposed us as parents. We now know the ones that know book and the ones that don't. It was such a funny thing to hear, but that's the reality, right? You said you made a comment that parents have now been converted into pseudo teachers, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, they have 2 jobs. If you have a child that's going to school or had to engage in virtual learning, after attending to your normal job, you actually apportion time to teaching your child and getting them through class. Exactly.
Usually both at the same time.
Yeah, especially when internet fails, right? I have a sister-in-law that the internet failed at certain point. She was confused. She was like, how am I going to do this? I wasn't there when you guys learned the first part. So that's a concern, right?
I was going to say that, but even at that, now there's so many ways to use, maybe we'll get to that, to use the virtual learning in a way that, because the internet fails, there's asynchronous learning, there's ability to go back later, there's so many ways you can make it work.
We'll talk about that in a moment. And let me go to the messages so we can involve everybody else. Remember, you can call into the show. We have 25 minutes left for this conversation, actually 20 minutes. So please call in on 0144899981, 0144899981 to be part of this conversation. Send your questions to WhatsApp 0809 444 0981. My guests, Dr. Modupe Adefeso-Olateju. She's the Managing Director of Education Partnership Center, TEP Center for short, and a policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. Nwani, Dr. Nwani is the MD/CEO of Middle Hall Group. You know that group very well. But let me go quickly to the phone lines that answer this one. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the show. What is your name, please? Where are you calling from? I didn't get your name, please. Oh, Saji, welcome. All right. Do you have a comment or question? Please go ahead.
Yes. Thanks for the analysts and the discussants that are there. I am fortunate to be a product of Papa Obafemi Awolowo's education aspect. In an expansion on it that people will train teachers and facilities and all that, there's a place people need to begin. And certainly they began there. And there were many, many known improvements in the Papa system. And what we were trying to get at were to educate the people, and also quality education came forth. I'm talking concerning the Northerners that were afraid of education, Western education because of Christianity. Are they still in that light, in the same vein as of today, as our educational aspect improved up to date, and the lady also that is in an educational services? What improvement or educational training does she give to our teachers or our staff? These are the things we need to ponder on. Our educational system cannot be improved. We can look at other countries. The way the educational system improves is not degrading. But in our own case here, we are retrogressing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saji, for that statement and the question. Dr. Mo, did you catch the question there?
Yes, I did, and I'll share some thoughts. I think that starting from the last points that the gentleman made, and thank you very much for those comments, it is actually useful to look at models from other countries and ascertain where there are opportunities to make a difference in our own system. Usually I advocate for policy learning as opposed to policy borrowing, in the sense that you want to contextualize what you're learning from other contexts. And what you're going to find that's interesting is that the pandemic truly flipped the script, for us in Nigeria. The states that did very, very well in terms of their own focus on ensuring that there was no learning loss have become models actually for other contexts. And it's important, I think, to highlight that. Mrs. Nwani gave a very good example of Lagos State, and there's several states, across Nigeria that in themselves can serve as models for other contexts and other countries. In terms of the perspective of the northern part of the country, I think just looking at the data and the evidence, we can draw almost a nearly straight line, across the country when it comes to educational performance. And I think this really speaks to what Mrs. Nwani was talking about earlier on, around the historical antecedents of this bifurcated learning outcome system, in Nigeria. Thankfully, there is the realization more and more every day, with the support of good leadership in certain states, with the support of, the development agencies and development community, and huge support, from religious organizations, communities, there's this renewed focus on making sure that children, even children in the North, have access to measures of good quality education. And I think that is happening more and more. You must also remember, however, that we are operating within a context that is not static. Children are being born every day. The birth rates are very high in the northern part of the country. Budgets are not necessarily increasing. So the context continues to be challenging. But at the same time, it's important to focus on what might be working, because those outliers are what give us an opportunity to think about replication and scale. So those are my comments.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kenny, have something to add?
Yeah.
To
okay, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, okay. So yeah, thank you very much for the question. I believe that, yeah, definitely things are not, we talked about the history, but thankfully things have improved. But I just brought in the history because as we all know about history, the past, it helps you to understand what happened in the past, the mistakes of the past, and helps you to go, forward. So that's why I brought that in. Definitely, of course, we also know that even despite all the effort of the government, state governments in the North and all that, you still have like the sect that still wants to stop education because they see education as sacrilege. So that is there. So it's still in a way, to me, tied to that historical factor. But then, everybody's doing everything, the federal government, the state governments, to ensure that even children in the North have education. Now here, I believe the person that, I think Soji was the name, also talked about trainings. Oh, trainings. Without trainings, in fact, education cannot survive without trainings, not just trainings, quality training. And that is what we are able to offer. And I actually, as an individual, apart from what I do in, running a private education group, I'm also an education reformer. We have a mental health foundation where we actually look into training of teachers, giving quality training to teachers, both in the public sector and in low-cost private schools. And also I belong to another education reform group. Dr. Mo is also one of us. It's called ERIT, Education Reform and Innovation Team. And that's also part of our focus. We focus on school improvement, working with public and low-cost private schools, with focus on transformation, improvement, trainings and all. So that's what I absolutely believe in training. There's so many ways training can be done. And in addition, there's a very good way of training now, which is supposed to be even better than just going out for training on somebody coming to train. It is what we call having a supportive community of practice. It is the best training for teachers because when they come together as a community, they learn from each other. They talk about the problems that affect them in their own classrooms. They can leverage, on each other's strengths. And that is also another form of training that we focus on apart from, formal trainings. So yes, it's something that is non-negotiable in improving education in the country.
Thank you for both of you. This is to both of you, Dr. Mo and Dr. Nwani, for touching on the security aspect of this issue, which is the next line of conversation, all right? In the meantime, we're streaming on YouTube, so feel free to jump in there, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Smooth 981 FM Lagos. Biodun Oyele says, if the country loves its children, they should invest in all those responsible for developing them, i.e. the educational sector, with the right pegs in the right holes. Very important. Quickly, let's take this WhatsApp message from Michael. Michael, thank you for that. Didi says it will be a miracle when Nigeria invests heavily in education. The more educated the citizens become, the more they will demand for better Nigeria. And we all know they do not want that. Who are they? Let's find out after this break.
future-forward banking.
I'm suggesting the obvious as if,
somehow you've gone a bit faint.
Oh.
I don't know. Is it me?
Oh.
You guys?
No?
Because is it a bit faint?
Yes.
Yeah? All of a sudden.
I think you started to take the questions from the.
That was our that, can you hear me? Because I thought something else. But I can
rise of the machines. And the way time flies during this show, it's annoying sometimes because when we get to the part where the conversation is sweet, you see that you only have 10 minutes left. We'll be back. I'll take messages from WhatsApp and then we'll talk on the security aspect and the religious polarization.
Yeah.
In case I'm missing out anything, is there any issue or any specific points that you would like to harp on before we go? Dr. Moore,
Okay.
No.
I would have said maybe, maybe some people might be listening that people have been asking me, so after the pandemic, what's the new, what next? Yes. What next? So we've discussed the pandemic, yes. But really, how do we make sure, there are no gaps in the learning of the students? And what next? How are you going to, make sure that this is just not something that happened during the pandemic? I think some listeners might want to know how they can combine this eventually.
That's a very good question. Thank you. In fact, I think I'll bring us back with that because it feels everything that's happening now, everything that has been happening leading up to this point feels temporary. We wish it's temporary. We feel like, I'm so eager to say post-COVID because I want us to be done with this so we can move on to normal life. But is life going to be normal again? I don't think so. So that's actually important.
Good question.
Dr. Moore, I can tell you've been doing this for way too long. You're so good at camera focus, like zero shot.
Every judge by its cover. Are we on air right now?
No, we're not. But we're live on YouTube anyway.
Okay. So can people see my video right now?
Yes.
Okay. So I better just talk up because I was going to show you something that would have been really interesting to show.
Okay. After this interview, I'll you show me, please. I'm like, she's talking. I can tell that she's making some references, but I can't see her eyes moving. Like, it's amazing.
5-year-old whom my hand is on as I speak to you.
This is Smooth 98.1 FM Lagos. If you're not watching the YouTube stream, you're missing out on a lot. So much going on behind the scenes, but we're here. Smooth 98.1, Smooth Breakfast. My name is Valentine. This segment is called Lagos Talks 981. But today's presentation is a special because I have two wonderful people speaking with me, two professionals in the education sector. Dr. Nwani is a professional. She runs Meadow Hall. Dr. Kehinde Nwani, she's the MD/CEO of Meadow Hall Group, an educational group of companies with several subsidiaries. She's a lawyer, a professional lawyer, and she decided to leave that practice, right? She's still a lawyer, yes. But she decided to focus on her first passion, which is education, and setting up this institution. They've been doing great work. And also she's here with Dr. Modupe Adefeso-Olateju. You are so famous, Dr. Mo, that your name precedes you. Dr. Mo is the Managing Director of the Educational Partnership Center, otherwise called TEP, a policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships. She's been instrumental in many ways in forming policies. She contributed as part of the technical team that assembled, that was assembled by the Honorable Minister of Education in Nigeria between 2011 and 2015, that wrote this section of the Federal Ministry of Education Strategic Plan for Education. In that plan, Dr. Mo, did you envisage education getting to this point that we're at, the points that we defined at the onset of this conversation, especially now that we have polarizing statements or, religious polarization that still leans into education? So that the matters of security, matters of, I would say the education gap, the serious education gap, especially in the North. When in planning those policies, did you ever envisage that things would be the way they are now with kidnappings and insecurity around education in the North, especially?
Unfortunately, we have had security challenges for a long time. They didn't start today. You remember that the Chibok crisis was actually in 2014.
Right.
So it's actually been a while. It doesn't feel that way, but it's been a while. And I think that for the lives that are impacted by these crises, it's a never-ending torture, never-ending. And so yes, I mean, one could easily have predicted, that we would get to a point where we would be even increasingly polarized, and that's because there are a lot of variables in this particular equation. One of the variables is poverty. Within a context where you have increasing levels of poverty, what you're going to find is that because it's a multi-ethnic and a multi-religious society, the socioeconomic constructs are going to become even more divisive, right? And so as people get poorer, they're going to begin to see the differences between themselves and other people more clearly, right? And that's very important to realize. So whether it's in terms of education or in terms of health, in terms of agriculture, you're going to see that polarization. And I think we're seeing that all over. We're seeing that all over the country. So yes, it could have been predicted. However, what really is the purpose of education? And I think that this is a foundational question which we need to address as a people. Earlier on in the conversation, we were talking about perhaps exploring models from other contexts and other countries, and perhaps even exporting some of our own models of good practice to other contexts. But the reality is that this year marks, I think, the 52nd year that we actually sat down to have a good conversation about what the purpose of education should be in Nigeria. So the 1969 Curriculum Conference still remains that landmark moment when Nigeria was coming out of civil unrest, the crisis, the Biafra War. We were coming out of a civil war. And that unfortunately sharpened our lens and helped us to see more clearly what the future could be for us if we didn't take decisive steps. As a result of that conference, we birthed a new curriculum. And that curriculum is steeped within constructs that you can still observe in Nigeria today. The notion of unity schools began as part of that conference. We need to unify the country. We need to make sure that children from the North can go to school in the South, children from the East can go to school in the West. The National Youth Service Scheme, the National Youth Service Corps, was birthed as a result of that. Because the realization was that if we don't take these steps, we will disintegrate and we will probably fall into yet another civil war. And so it is time, in fact, it is beyond time, for us to take this very critical look at what the purpose of education should be. And the 1969 Curriculum Conference and the report of that actually give us a fantastic template that we can begin to build upon. So it's less about our religious differences, it's less about our ethnic differences, and it's more about who we want to be as a people. Education for me is enlightenment. And if you ask me, what does education do for you? I would tell you that education gives you life chances. It gives you an opportunity, it gives you a lever. If we continue to dumb down the role of education and squeeze it into the narrow bucket of religion, very narrow bucket of religion, the very narrow bucket of ethnicity, we will not explore our full potential as a people. And so I think that at the heart of this conversation is, what do we actually want for ourselves as a people, as a country, as a nation? And that's when we can begin to have a constructive conversation. Because if we don't start from there, any conversation that we have will be flavored by ethnic sentiments and will be muddied by religious leanings. So we need to be frank with ourselves and ask, as the world is moving forward, do we want to move forward? Are we content to be where we are, or perhaps to retrogress? And it's a conversation that we need to have sooner than later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. I think that emphasizes or underscores the point you made, Dr. Nwani, when you mentioned the 4 C's, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And you mentioned that, I mean, in spite of the fact that it involves a lot of technological integration and on the part of teachers or students to move forward, because things have changed, and I don't think we're reverting to the status quo or the old ways. How is this going to influence the quality of education going forward?
So how is what going to influence the quality of education?
How we've morphed, how the education system has morphed to this point. Yes.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I think the first thing you said, there's this saying by someone called Ralph Emerson. He says, "The mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions." That's what has happened with the pandemic and everything. Things have changed and they would never go back to what they were before. Now, I would say that as we go forward, we need to, consciously think about certain things. I'm going to say that if private and public schools, whenever after the vaccines have been taken and things go back to normal, I think that as we go forward, we must put some things in place. I think starting with the students, our focus on the students. So I said to my colleagues the other day, teachers in our school, that the first thing to do is, even before the next session starts, we need to get the students back to be sure where the gaps are, identify, because if we build on any faulty foundation based on what has happened, technology has been very helpful, but definitely I think it's clear that it really cannot replace face-to-face in-person learning, at least not at the infant, junior, and I dare say secondary level. So there's a lot that happens when a teacher is looking at the child in class. You're looking at the body language. You're looking at the eyes. You're noting the characteristics of this child normally and how the child is presenting today. A lot of that is missed online. So we're still able to do a lot. We still do our lesson observations online. You do your assessments. You do everything online. There are aspects that might have been missed. So I think as we go forward, the first thing to do is to make sure that any gap that might be identified, we must go looking for gaps. Gaps are something that you actually have to look out for. And you must close those gaps so we do not build on the faulty foundation. It shouldn't be because of the pandemic. At the end of the day, children then, for life, their learning is affected. So I think that's a good place to start. And as I said, technology is so important. In fact, we have a saying in our school, in technology, there's technology is important. And after technology is still technology. Everybody must understand technology. But also, I need all teachers to understand that there are very important aspects, skills that children must learn. And you cannot give what you do not have. So teachers, again, must go and, learn and, develop themselves. Schools should train their teachers in those learning and thinking skills, the 4 C's I mentioned. ICT, social media skills, we're talking about it. Life and career skills, these are things that the teachers they should have, and they should teach the children. I'll also say as a roundup that curriculum, we must look at the curriculum. The curriculum right now is, it promotes a lot of what you say is, ability to collect information, store information, retrieve information, memorization, recall. That is what, our curriculum kind of gives right now. But very soon, AI and technology will get, we can't compete against AI, artificial intelligence. We cannot compete against technology. So we need to continue to develop the areas that technology cannot do, which is the area of humanity, creativity, being curious, growth mindset, entrepreneurship. You know, these are the things as we go forward. Technology, yes, very, very important, but there are also other aspects, which are actually 21st century content areas and skills that have been very important, but we have overlooked over the years.
Yes.
But this is a good time to bring those things in now as we go forward.
Time is fast spent. I would like to add one more part that you missed: empathy.
Empathy, that's a human characteristic, characteristic that computers don't have.
Yes, yes. Dr. Mo, closing statements, just as a way of closing this conversation, your advice, what you would like to see going forward.
I'd like to see a situation where all the different stakeholders within the Nigerian education space, and that's to say every Nigerian really, comes to the realization that we can be everything that we want to be as a country, and our children can achieve anything that we want them to achieve. However, there is a cost to that.
Yes.
And we have to be able to identify what that cost is, and we have to begin to pay it. That cost will come in being more transparent and more accountable as a government, will come in being more rigorous in the way that we approach evidence and placing more emphasis on data rather than on sentiments. And that will come in the place of how we recruit people into the education sector and trying to focus on attracting some of the best and the brightest into the sector. And that would really also take us to the area of resourcing and how it is that we need to prioritize our resourcing in the sector. Again, I say it, we can be anything that we want to be. And it's just a function of us being determined that we are going to achieve that. And I do have hope. I have a lot of hope for the country. And I hope that everyone who's listening also holds that hope as well.
I want to especially thank everyone who sent in messages on YouTube. We see you. We appreciate you. And Yemisi on WhatsApp, thank you so much. I saw your message. I want to especially thank you, Dr. Mo. Dr. Modupe, thank you. Dr. Modupe Mo Adefeso-Olateju, the Managing Director of the Educational Partnership Center, and Dr. Kehinde Nwani, the MDC of Meadow Hall Group. Thank you so much, and well done for the work you're doing with the Education Reform and Innovation team. I'm glad to know that you're both working together in that sense. Thank you so much for having this wonderful interview with me. I feel like I'm gisting with my teachers, from those days. I used to be one of their favorite students.